The radio crackled with static as Sergeant Martinez pressed his back against the concrete wall, sweat mixing with dust on his face. 3 days. 3 days his elite ranger unit had been pinned down by an enemy sniper who seemed to read their every move like words on a page. The insurgent had already claimed 2 of his best men, and now the entire mission hung by a thread. This is impossible, he whispered into his radio, watching another carefully planned advance dissolve into chaos as a single shot rang out across the valley. But 200 meters away, crouched behind a pile of rubble, with a rifle that had seen more battles than most soldiers see in a lifetime, someone was watching. Someone who had been dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated by every commanding officer she'd ever served under. Someone whose steady hands and sharper eyes were about to prove that sometimes the impossible just needs the right person to make it look easy. This is the story of how one woman's refusal to accept no turned a failed mission into legend, and changed the way an entire military unit understood what it meant to fight alongside a true warrior. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training grounds at Fort Benning, when Sarah Chen first realized her military career would be a battle fought on 2 fronts. While other recruits stumbled through their morning runs, she moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent her childhood tracking deer through the forests of Montana with her grandfather. Her breathing remained steady, her pace unwavering, even as the drill sergeants barked commands that sent grown men scrambling. Sarah had enlisted with a singular focus that set her apart from her peers. Where others saw military service as a path to college funding or career advancement, she saw it as a calling that had been whispering in her ear since she was 12 years old, watching her grandfather clean his hunting rifle on their kitchen table. He had taught her that marksmanship wasn't just about pulling a trigger, it was about patience, discipline, and understanding the delicate balance between life and death that existed in that split second before the shot. Her scores at the shooting range quickly became the stuff of whispered conversations among the training staff. While other recruits celebrated hitting targets at 300 meters, Sarah was consistently placing shots within a 2-inch grouping at 600 meters. Her breathing so controlled that even the most experienced instructors found themselves pausing to watch her technique. But with recognition came resistance, and the higher her scores climbed, the more obvious it became that many of her superiors weren't sure what to do with a woman who could outshoot their best male recruits. The first real test came during advanced combat training, when Sergeant Thompson, a 20-year veteran with scars that told stories he'd never share, called her aside after another perfect shooting session. His weathered face bore the expression of a man wrestling with traditions that had been challenged by undeniable talent. He'd seen plenty of good shooters come and go, but Sarah possessed something that couldn't be taught, an intuitive understanding of ballistics, wind patterns, and the subtle environmental factors that turned good shots into perfect ones. "Chen," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent in uniform. "You've got a gift, but gifts don't mean much if they can't be used where they're needed most."
Sarah understood the subtext immediately.
The military sniper programs remained largely closed to women, not through official policy, but through the kind of institutional inertia that moved like molasses and changed only when absolutely necessary. She had heard the conversations that stopped when she entered rooms, seen the looks exchanged between instructors when her name appeared at the top of shooting competition results. Excellence, she was learning, could be as much a burden as it was an asset. But Sarah had inherited more than just steady hands from her grandfather. She had inherited his stubborn streak, the kind of quiet determination that could weather storms and outlast opponents who mistook silence for weakness. Every morning she arrived at the Grange 30 minutes before official training began, working through exercises that pushed her skills beyond the standard requirements. She studied ballistics manuals that most soldiers never bothered to read, memorizing wind patterns and bullet trajectories with the same dedication other recruits applied to memorizing military protocol. Her opportunity came during a joint training exercise with special operations units, including a ranger company that had been brought in to demonstrate advanced combat techniques. The exercise was designed to showcase the integration of different military specialties, with various units working together to accomplish objectives that no single group could handle alone. Sarah had been assigned to a support role, providing overwatch for ground units as they moved through a simulated urban environment. The scenario was complex, involving multiple objectives spread across several square kilometers of terrain that had been modified to replicate the kind of challenging environments American forces encountered overseas. Buildings had been constructed to mimic the architectural styles found in conflict zones, complete with multiple levels, hidden passages, and sightlines that created perfect opportunities for ambush tactics. The opposing force, made up of experienced soldiers playing the role of insurgents, had been given weeks to prepare their positions and develop strategies designed to challenge even the most elite units. From her position on a hill overlooking the training area, Sarah watched through her scope as the Rangers moved through their assigned sectors with the kind of precision that came from years of working together as a cohesive unit. These were soldiers who had seen real combat, men whose movements reflected hard-earned experience in environments where mistakes meant more than just failed exercises. She could see the way they communicated without words, the subtle hand signals and positioning adjustments that allowed them to flow around obstacles like water finding its path down a mountain. But something was wrong. Through her scope, Sarah had identified what appeared to be an additional sniper position that hadn't been included in the mission briefing. A carefully concealed shooter who was tracking the Rangers' movement with the kind of professional patience that suggested serious training. The position was expertly chosen, offering clear sight lines to multiple choke points while remaining invisible from ground level. Even more concerning, the shooter's positioning indicated knowledge of the Rangers' planned route, suggesting either exceptional fieldcraft or access to information that should have been restricted. Sarah's radio crackled with routine updates as she watched the situation develop, her finger hovering over the transmission button as she debated whether to break protocol and alert the Rangers to the threat she had identified. Military exercises had strict rules about communication channels and reporting procedures, and as a support element, she was supposed to observe and report through her immediate chain of command, not communicate directly with the unit she was watching. The decision was made for her when she saw the muzzle flash from the hidden position, followed immediately by the sight of one of the Rangers dropping to the ground in the dramatic fashion that indicated he had been killed according to the exercise rules. The shot had been perfectly placed, taking advantage of a momentary exposure as the Ranger moved between covered positions. It was the kind of shot that demonstrated professional-level marksmanship skills far beyond what should have been expected in a training scenario. Sarah keyed her radio, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline that was beginning to course through her system. Overwatch to command, I have eyes on an unmarked sniper position, grid reference 724983. Appears to be engaging friendly forces with precision fire. The response came back immediately, filled with the kind of confusion that indicated her report didn't match what the exercise controllers thought should be happening. Overwatch, confirm your position and repeat your report. We show no additional sniper positions in that area. Through her scope, Sarah watched as another Ranger fell, the victim of another precisely placed shot from a position that officially didn't exist. The remaining Rangers had taken cover, but their positions were compromised, and she could see the hidden sniper adjusting his aim to engage targets that thought they were safely concealed behind cover that wasn't adequate for the angle he was using. Command, I have positive identification of hostile sniper, grid reference 724983. Request permission to engage. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever, filled with the static of radio transmissions and the distant sounds of the exercise continuing in other sectors. Sarah knew that her request was highly irregular. Support elements weren't authorized to engage targets without specific orders, and the chain of command for training exercises was designed to maintain control and prevent the kind of chaos that could result from individual soldiers making independent decisions. But while the radio remained silent, her scope showed her everything she needed to know. The hidden sniper was preparing for another shot, his rifle trained on a Ranger who had no idea he was about to be eliminated from the exercise by someone who shouldn't have been there in the first place. Sarah made a decision that would change everything that followed. Without waiting for authorization that might never come, she adjusted her aim, controlled her breathing, and squeezed the trigger with the same steady pressure her grandfather had taught her during those long afternoons in the Montana woods. The shot was perfect, placed with precision that spoke to years of dedicated practice and natural talent that couldn't be ignored. Through her scope, she watched the hidden sniper jerk backward, his rifle falling away as he reacted to the simulated impact that marked him as eliminated from the exercise according to the training rules. The radio exploded with chatter as exercise controllers scrambled to understand what had happened. Their carefully planned scenario suddenly complicated by variables they hadn't anticipated. But for Sarah, the moment of the shot had brought a clarity that transcended the confusion surrounding her. She had proven something to herself that no amount of range time or qualification scores could have demonstrated when it mattered, when lives hung in the balance. She could perform under pressure with the kind of precision that separated true snipers from merely good shooters. The aftermath would bring questions, investigations, and conversations with superior officers who struggled to fit her actions into the rigid categories that governed military protocol, but it would also bring something else. The attention of people who understood that exceptional talent, regardless of its source, was too valuable to ignore. As Sarah packed up her equipment and prepared to face whatever consequences her decision might bring, she felt no regret about the choice she had made. Her grandfather had taught her that the right shot at the right moment could change everything, and she was beginning to understand that her journey in the military would be defined by moments when conventional wisdom met unconventional solutions. The Rangers she had protected didn't know her name yet, but they would remember the day when someone they couldn't see had watched their backs with the kind of skill that turned potential disaster into tactical success. And in the conversations that would follow, her actions would begin to challenge assumptions about capability, gender, and the changing face of modern warfare that even the most progressive military leaders were still learning to navigate. The conference room smelled of stale coffee and bureaucratic tension when Sarah entered 3 days after the training incident. Colonel Mitchell sat at the head of a polished wooden table, flanked by officers whose ribbons and insignia told stories of campaigns fought in places most civilians couldn't pronounce. The investigation into her unauthorized engagement had been swift and thorough, with witness statements, ballistics reports, and detailed timeline reconstructions that painted a picture of split-second decision-making under pressure. Sarah maintained perfect military bearing as she listened to the formal recounting of events, though inside she felt the familiar knot of anxiety that had accompanied every performance evaluation since her enlistment. The military was an institution built on following orders and maintaining chain of command, and what she had done, taking independent action without authorization, went against fundamental principles that held the entire system together. Colonel Mitchell's weathered face revealed nothing as he spoke, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected other people's lives and careers. Private Chen, your actions during the exercise saved multiple Rangers from elimination and demonstrated exceptional marksmanship under pressure. However, you violated direct orders and broke the chain of command in a way that could have compromised the entire training scenario. The silence that followed seemed to stretch across continents, filled with the weight of institutional precedent and the challenge of balancing individual excellence against collective discipline. Sarah understood that her future in the military hung in the balance, determined not just by her capabilities, but by how well the system could adapt to accommodate talents that didn't fit neatly into existing categories. But Colonel Mitchell wasn't finished. His next words would prove to be the pivot point that transformed potential punishment into unprecedented opportunity. That being said, your shooting demonstrates capabilities that this military needs, especially given the evolving nature of modern warfare and the threats our forces face in current deployment zones. The officers around the table exchanged glances that spoke to conversations that had taken place before Sarah entered the room. Discussions about capability gaps, mission requirements, and the reality that combat effectiveness sometimes required thinking beyond traditional limitations. The hidden sniper Sarah had eliminated had been a test, they explained. A special operations instructor who had been inserted into the exercise to evaluate how different units responded to unexpected threats. Major Rodriguez, whose Ranger tab and combat patches indicated extensive field experience, leaned forward as he addressed Sarah directly. His voice carried the rough edge of someone who had learned leadership lessons in places where theory met brutal reality, and his assessment carried weight that transcended rank structure. Private, in 12 years of running training exercises, we've never seen anyone identify and eliminate that position as quickly as you did. The shooter you engaged is one of our best instructors, a former special operations sniper with multiple combat deployments and a training record that speaks for itself. The revelation recontextualized everything that had happened during the exercise, transforming what Sarah had perceived as a violation of protocol into validation of skills that even experienced professionals recognized as exceptional. The hidden sniper hadn't been an oversight or mistake. He had been a deliberate challenge designed to test the limits of unit capabilities and individual performance under pressure. Colonel Mitchell opened a folder that contained documents Sarah couldn't see from her position across the table. Papers that rustled with the sound of administrative machinery in motion. When he spoke again, his words carried implications that would reshape her understanding of what her military career could become. Private Chen, I'm going to present you with an opportunity that doesn't come along often. The Army is piloting a new program designed to identify and develop exceptional marksmanship talent for specialized roles in support of special operations units. This program is currently limited to volunteers who demonstrate capabilities that exceed standard qualification requirements. The program Colonel Mitchell described existed at the intersection of military tradition and operational necessity, created by commanders who understood that modern warfare required flexibility in how capabilities were identified and utilized. Sarah would later learn that her situation wasn't unique. Across different branches of the military, exceptional performers were being identified and developed through programs that prioritized results over conventional career paths. The opportunity came with conditions that reflected both the promise and challenges of pioneering new roles within established institutions. Sarah would undergo training that exceeded standard sniper school requirements, working with instructors whose experience spanned multiple combat theaters and whose teaching methods had been refined through years of developing soldiers for the most demanding missions. But she would also face scrutiny that went beyond normal training evaluation, with her performance serving as a case study for whether the program could successfully develop capabilities that met special operations standards. Every shot would be measured, every decision analyzed, and every interaction with male colleagues examined through the lens of integration challenges that the military was still learning to navigate. Major Rodriguez explained the technical aspects of what Sarah would face, describing training scenarios that pushed students beyond their comfort zones and into the kind of extreme situations that separated capable soldiers from elite performers. The program would test not just marksmanship skills but psychological resilience, physical endurance, and the ability to make life or death decisions while operating independently in hostile environments. The training will be harder than anything you've experienced, he said, his tone carrying both warning and encouragement. You'll be working alongside some of the best soldiers in the military, people who have proven themselves in combat and who won't accept anything less than perfection from themselves or their teammates. Sarah accepted the opportunity with the same quiet confidence that had carried her through every challenge since enlistment, understanding that she was being offered a chance to prove capabilities that extended far beyond what traditional career paths would have allowed. The paperwork that followed formalized her transfer to a training pipeline that would test every skill her grandfather had taught her and push her to develop new ones that could save lives in situations she couldn't yet imagine. The transition from regular military training to specialized sniper development happened with bureaucratic efficiency that masked the significance of what was taking place. Sarah found herself assigned to a facility that looked like dozens of other military installations but operated according to standards that reflected the elite nature of the soldiers who trained there. Her new instructors were men whose quiet professionalism spoke to experience earned through multiple deployments in challenging environments. Soldiers who had learned their craft through years of making shots that meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. They evaluated her initial performance with the kind of clinical assessment that left no room for encouragement or criticism, focusing instead on identifying strengths to build upon and weaknesses to eliminate. The first weeks of training revealed gaps in Sarah's preparation that even her exceptional natural ability couldn't compensate for, skills that required development through repetition and refinement under increasingly challenging conditions. She learned to calculate bullet trajectories across distances that made her previous range work seem elementary, factoring in environmental variables that could affect accuracy in ways she had never considered. But more importantly, she learned to think like a sniper rather than simply shoot like one, developing the patience and tactical awareness that allowed elite marksmen to operate independently while supporting larger military objectives. The training pushed her to understand her role, not just as someone who could make difficult shots, but as someone who could gather intelligence, provide overwatch, and eliminate threats in ways that enhanced overall mission effectiveness. Her male classmates initially approached her with a kind of professional skepticism that reflected their own hard-earned positions in the program. But skepticism gradually gave way to respect, as Sarah consistently demonstrated capabilities that met the demanding standards they all faced. The training environment was too challenging and the consequences of failure too serious for anything other than merit-based evaluation, and Sarah's performance spoke louder than any concerns about gender integration. The breakthrough moment came during a complex training scenario that required students to provide sniper support for a simulated rescue operation, with multiple targets, time constraints, and environmental factors that made success dependent on perfect execution under pressure. Sarah found herself positioned on a hillside overlooking a valley where her classmates were attempting to extract friendly personnel from a compound defended by instructors playing the role of hostile forces. The scenario was designed to test decision-making as much as marksmanship, with multiple potential targets and a rapidly changing tactical situation that required snipers to prioritize threats and coordinate their actions with ground forces. Sarah watched through her scope as the situation developed, identifying patterns in the opposing forces' movement that suggested a level of tactical sophistication that exceeded what students usually encountered in training exercises. When the moment came to engage, Sarah's shots were placed with precision that impressed even instructors who had seen years of elite performance. But more importantly, her target selection and timing demonstrated tactical understanding that went beyond mechanical skill. She had identified the key threats that posed the greatest danger to the rescue operation and eliminated them in a sequence that maximized the chances of mission success. The after-action review that followed the exercise included praise from instructors who rarely offered positive feedback, acknowledgement that Sarah had demonstrated not just exceptional marksmanship but the kind of tactical thinking that characterized the best sniper operations. Her performance had proven that the capabilities she possessed could be developed and refined to meet the demanding standards required for special operations support. As Sarah packed her equipment after another successful training day, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a small town in Montana to a military career that was exceeding every expectation she had held when she first enlisted. The challenges ahead remained significant, with advanced training phases that would test her limits in ways she couldn't yet anticipate. But she felt confident that the foundation being built through current training would support whatever came next. The phone call that would change everything came on a Thursday evening in October, when Sarah was cleaning her rifle in the armory and planning for the next day's training exercises. The voice on the other end belonged to Colonel Mitchell, whose tone carried an urgency that immediately commanded her attention. "Private Chen, we have a situation that requires your immediate deployment to a forward operating base in Afghanistan. There's a Ranger company that has encountered opposition that exceeds their current capabilities, and they've specifically requested sniper support with your skill set." The deployment would mark Sarah's transition from training to operational reality, from proving herself in controlled environments to demonstrating her capabilities in the kind of high-stakes situations that had no room for error. Everything she had learned, every skill she had developed, and every challenge she had overcome would be tested in an environment where success meant lives saved, and failure could have consequences that extended far beyond individual careers. The helicopter's rotors beat against the thin mountain air as Sarah peered through the small window at the rugged Afghan landscape below, a terrain that looked like the surface of an alien planet with its harsh beauty and obvious dangers. The mountains stretched endlessly in every direction, their peaks carved by centuries of weather into formations that provided perfect cover for anyone who understood how to use them tactically. This was country that had swallowed armies throughout history, where the geography itself became a weapon in the hands of people who knew every ridge, every valley, and every path that could hide a moving force forward. Operating Base Chapman sat in a valley surrounded by hills that rose like ancient sentinels, their slopes dotted with rocks and scrub vegetation that could conceal threats at any distance. The base itself was a collection of temporary buildings, concrete barriers, and defensive positions that spoke to the reality of operating in hostile territory, where security was measured not in comfort, but in the ability to detect and respond to attacks that could come from any direction. Sarah's arrival at Chapman was met with the kind of professional assessment that characterized military units operating under combat conditions, where new personnel were evaluated not through formal introductions, but through immediate integration into operational requirements. The Rangers who would become her temporary unit were men whose equipment bore the wear patterns of extended deployment, soldiers whose movements reflected hard-earned experience in an environment where mistakes had consequences that extended beyond training exercises. Sergeant Martinez, the Ranger team leader whose radio transmission had initiated her deployment, met Sarah at the landing zone with the kind of direct approach that combat veterans used when time was limited and results were paramount. His weathered face showed the strain of 3 days spent dealing with a tactical problem that had claimed 2 of his soldiers and left his unit pinned down in positions that were becoming more dangerous with each passing hour. "Chen, glad you're here. We've got a situation that's been developing for 72 hours and we need someone who can make shots that most people can't even see." His voice carried the rough edge of exhaustion mixed with determination, the sound of someone who had pushed beyond normal limits and was still pushing because the mission demanded it. The briefing that followed painted a picture of tactical complexity that challenged everything Sarah had learned about sniper operations, a scenario where traditional approaches had failed and innovative thinking was required to break a deadlock that threatened to become a strategic disaster. The enemy sniper they faced wasn't just skilled, he was operating with local knowledge, superior positioning, and tactical intelligence that suggested professional training and extensive preparation. Intelligence reports indicated that the opposing sniper had been active in the region for several months, responsible for a series of attacks that had demonstrated capabilities far beyond what local insurgent forces typically possessed. His shots were consistently placed with precision that spoke to formal training, and his positioning showed understanding of ballistics and fieldcraft that matched or exceeded American military standards. The tactical map spread across the briefing table showed terrain that told the story of why conventional approaches had failed, with elevation changes, natural obstacles, and sightlines that created advantages for anyone willing to use patience and superior positioning to maximum effect. The enemy sniper had chosen his operating area with the kind of strategic thinking that turned geographic features into tactical assets, creating multiple fallback positions and escape routes that made traditional counter-sniper operations extremely difficult. Sarah studied the map with the systematic approach her training had developed, identifying patterns in the reported attacks that suggested not just individual capability, but coordinated planning and support that indicated organizational backing. The shots hadn't been random or opportunistic. They had been calculated actions designed to achieve specific tactical objectives while minimizing the shooter's exposure to counterattack. "He's been hitting us from positions that should be impossible to use effectively," explained Staff Sergeant Williams, whose combat engineer background gave him insights into the technical aspects of the tactical challenge they faced. "The ranges are extreme, the angles are difficult, and he's compensating for environmental factors that should make accurate shooting nearly impossible." The enemy's success had created a tactical situation that went beyond the immediate threat of additional casualties, affecting the entire unit's ability to operate effectively in their assigned area of responsibility. Patrols had been curtailed, supply operations had been complicated, and the psychological impact of facing an opponent who could strike without warning had begun to affect morale in ways that threatened overall mission effectiveness. Sarah's first reconnaissance of the area took place before dawn, when the cool mountain air provided optimal conditions for long-range observation and the low light offered concealment advantages for anyone skilled in fieldcraft techniques. She moved through the terrain with the patience her grandfather had taught her during hunting expeditions that now seemed like preparation for exactly this kind of challenge, using every piece of available cover while gathering intelligence that would inform her tactical approach. Through her scope, the landscape revealed details that weren't apparent from map study or briefing materials, subtle features that could affect bullet trajectories and provide concealment opportunities for both hunter and hunted. Sarah identified several positions that could provide the kind of sightlines necessary for the attacks that had been reported, locations that combined tactical advantage with escape route access in ways that demonstrated sophisticated planning. But she also identified something that previous reconnaissance efforts had missed: indicators that the enemy sniper wasn't operating alone but was receiving support from spotters and security personnel who were helping him maintain awareness of American force movements and potential counter-sniper operations. The evidence was subtle, consisting of disturbed vegetation patterns and equipment positioning that suggested multiple personnel rather than a single operator. The realization that they were facing a coordinated team rather than an individual sniper changed everything about the tactical approach required for successful engagement, transforming what had been conceived as a duel between marksmen into a complex operation that would require careful planning and precise execution to avoid walking into a trap that had been specifically designed to defeat American counter-sniper efforts. Sarah spent the next 2 days in careful observation and planning, studying movement patterns, environmental conditions, and tactical possibilities with the systematic thoroughness that separated successful sniper operations from those that resulted in mission failure or casualties. She identified the enemy's primary position as a carefully prepared hide that took advantage of natural rock formations and elevation to provide both concealment and superior firing angles. But more importantly, she began to understand the enemy's operational pattern, recognizing that the opposing sniper operated according to a schedule and methodology that could be predicted and exploited by someone willing to invest the time necessary to identify the patterns. The enemy's strength, his systematic approach and careful preparation, could become a vulnerability if Sarah could position herself to take advantage of predictable behavior. The plan she developed was complex, requiring coordination with the Ranger unit and precise timing that would leave no margin for error or miscommunication. Sarah would need to position herself in a location that provided sightlines to the enemy's primary position while remaining concealed from the spotters and security personnel who were protecting him. A tactical challenge that required using terrain features in ways that pushed her fieldcraft skills to their limits. The night before the planned operation, Sarah found herself cleaning her rifle with the ritualistic care that had become as much about mental preparation as equipment maintenance, focusing on the mechanical actions that provided calm before missions that would test every skill she had developed. The weapon had become an extension of herself through months of training and practice, its weight and balance as familiar as her own heartbeat. Sergeant Martinez joined her in the quiet space that soldiers created before operations that carried significant risk, his presence offering the kind of professional camaraderie that developed between people who understood the stakes involved in what they were about to attempt. Well, his confidence in her abilities had grown through the planning process, but they both understood that combat operations had variables that no amount of preparation could completely control. "Chen, I want you to know that what you're planning tomorrow goes beyond anything we could have asked for. When we requested sniper support," he said, his voice carrying both gratitude and concern for someone who was about to face dangers that extended far beyond normal operational requirements. Sarah understood that tomorrow would test not just her marksmanship skills, but every aspect of her training and preparation, challenging her to perform under conditions that would separate proven capability from theoretical knowledge. The enemy sniper had already demonstrated that he was skilled, prepared, and dangerous, and the tactical situation offered advantages that could turn any mistake into a catastrophic outcome. But she also felt the quiet confidence that came from thorough preparation and systematic training. The knowledge that she had developed capabilities specifically for situations like the one she would face. Her grandfather's lessons about patience, precision, and understanding the balance between life and death had prepared her for moments when everything depended on making the right decision and executing it perfectly. As dawn approached, Sarah moved into position with the careful stealth that would determine whether her plan succeeded or failed, carrying equipment that represented months of specialized training and years of dedicated practice. The mountain air was crisp and clear, providing optimal conditions for the kind of long-range shooting that would be required, but also offering the same advantages to an opponent who had already proven his capability under similar conditions. The next few hours would determine whether Sarah's training, planning, and natural abilities were sufficient to neutralize a threat that had proven beyond the capabilities of conventional approaches, testing her skills against an opponent who had every advantage except one he didn't know she was coming. From her concealed position, Sarah could see the terrain where the enemy had been operating, a landscape that looked peaceful in the morning light, but held dangers that had already claimed American lives and threatened to claim more. Through her scope, every shadow could hide a threat, every rock formation could conceal an enemy position, and every movement could trigger a sequence of events that would determine who walked away from the encounter. The waiting began. The patient observation that separated successful sniper operations from hasty attempts that resulted in mission failure. Sarah settled into the kind of focused calm that her training had developed, monitoring environmental conditions, tracking subtle changes in the tactical situation, and preparing mentally for the moment when opportunity and capability would intersect in the space between heartbeats. The sun climbed higher over the Afghan mountains as Sarah maintained her position, her body perfectly still while her mind processed every detail of the terrain before her, through the scope that had become an extension of her vision. 3 hours of motionless observation had revealed patterns in the landscape that weren't apparent from casual examination. The way shadows moved across specific rock formations, the subtle differences in vegetation that indicated human passage, and the barely perceptible signs that marked prepared positions designed to remain invisible to conventional reconnaissance. Through her scope, Sarah could see the primary position where intelligence reports suggested the enemy sniper operated, a carefully constructed hide that took advantage of natural rock formations, approximately 800 meters from her location. The distance was extreme, even by military sniper standards, requiring calculations that factored in environmental variables most shooters never encountered. But the tactical situation offered no alternatives that provided both the necessary sightlines and adequate concealment for her approach. The enemy's position was masterfully chosen, offering commanding views of the valleys where American forces operated while providing multiple escape routes and concealment from conventional observation methods. Sarah understood why previous counter-sniper efforts had failed. The location combined tactical advantages that made traditional approaches extremely dangerous for anyone attempting to engage from predictable directions. But Sarah had spent 2 days identifying an approach angle that hadn't been considered by previous operations, a position that required extraordinary marksmanship to utilize effectively, but offered the possibility of engaging the enemy without triggering the security measures that protected his primary location. The shot would be technically challenging beyond anything she had attempted during training, requiring precision that pushed the limits of both equipment and human capability. Environmental conditions were optimal for long-range shooting, with minimal wind and clear visibility that allowed for accurate observation and target identification. Sarah had been monitoring wind patterns since before dawn, noting the subtle changes that could affect bullet trajectory over the extreme distance involved, and calculating corrections that would compensate for factors that could turn a perfect shot into a near miss with potentially catastrophic consequences. The radio in her ear crackled softly with periodic updates from the ranger team that was positioned to provide support and security for her operation, their voices carrying the tension that accompanied missions where success or failure would be measured in lives saved or lost. Sergeant Martinez had positioned his remaining personnel to provide overwatch and extraction support if Sarah's position was compromised, but they all understood that the primary operation depended entirely on her ability to make a shot that would eliminate the threat before the enemy could respond. Sarah's breathing remained controlled and steady as she continued her patient observation, waiting for the moment when opportunity and capability would align in the brief window that separated success from failure. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger guard, ready to move into position when the tactical situation provided the clear shot that her plan required, but disciplined enough to wait for optimal conditions rather than attempting a difficult shot under marginal circumstances. The breakthrough came at 11:30 in the morning, when movement in the enemy's position revealed the outline of a figure adjusting equipment in a way that suggested preparation for another attack against American forces. Through her scope, Sarah could see details that confirmed this was the sniper who had been responsible for the casualties that had brought her to Afghanistan. His positioning, equipment, and methodical approach all matched the intelligence profile that had been developed through weeks of observation and analysis. But the target presentation was partial and brief, offering only seconds of visibility before the enemy would return to the concealment that made him effectively invisible from conventional observation positions. Sarah understood that this might be her only opportunity to engage, with optimal environmental conditions, clear target identification, and tactical positioning that would allow her to take the shot without compromising her own location. The calculations required for successful engagement were complex beyond anything covered in standard training manuals, involving ballistics computations that factored in extreme distance, elevation differences, atmospheric conditions, and environmental variables that could affect bullet trajectory in ways that required intuitive understanding as much as technical knowledge. Sarah had prepared for these calculations through hours of study and practice, but the moment of execution would test her ability to apply theoretical knowledge under conditions that offered no margin for error. Sarah's breathing slowed to the controlled rhythm that her training had developed for moments of maximum precision, her heartbeat becoming part of the calculation as she prepared for the shot that would determine the outcome of an operation that had already cost American lives. Her grandfather's lessons about patience and precision merged with military training that had refined natural ability into professional capability, creating the focus necessary for performance under conditions that separated elite marksmen from merely skilled shooters. The crosshairs settled on the target with mechanical precision, Sarah's years of training guiding the subtle adjustments that compensated for distance, wind, and elevation in ways that had become instinctive through repetition and practice. Her finger moved from the trigger guard to the trigger itself, applying the steady pressure that would initiate the sequence of events that could change everything about the tactical situation her unit faced. The moment of the shot arrived with crystalline clarity, environmental conditions aligning with target presentation and tactical positioning in the brief window where perfect execution became possible. Sarah's trigger finger moved with controlled pressure that released months of training and years of preparation into the space between heartbeats, sending a precisely calculated projectile across terrain that had swallowed armies and claimed lives throughout history. The bullet's trajectory carried it across 800 meters of Afghan mountainside, following a path that compensated for gravitational effects, atmospheric resistance, and environmental factors that could deflect or alter its course. Sarah watched through her scope as the projectile traveled toward its target, time seeming to stretch during the flight time that would determine whether her calculations had been accurate enough to achieve the precision required for successful engagement. The impact came with finality that was both decisive and immediate, Sarah's shot finding its target with accuracy that validated every hour of training and every principle her grandfather had taught her about marksmanship, that extended beyond mechanical technique into understanding of the fundamental forces that governed precision shooting. Through her scope, she watched the enemy sniper's position for signs of movement or response, confirming that the threat which had terrorized American forces for months had been eliminated, with a single, perfectly placed shot. The radio erupted with confirmations and status reports as the Rangers observed the effects of Sarah's engagement, their voices carrying relief and admiration for marksmanship that had resolved the tactical situation through capabilities that exceeded what conventional approaches could have achieved. Sergeant Martinez's transmission carried gratitude that went beyond professional appreciation, acknowledging that Sarah's shot had saved lives and restored his unit's ability to operate effectively in their assigned area. But the mission wasn't complete with the elimination of the primary target, as Sarah's intelligence preparation had identified additional threats that required neutralization before the tactical situation could be considered resolved. The enemy support team that had been protecting the sniper remained active, and their response to their primary asset's elimination would determine whether Sarah's success could be consolidated into lasting tactical advantage. Through her scope, Sarah observed movement in secondary positions that confirmed her assessment that multiple personnel had been supporting the enemy sniper's operations, individuals who were now repositioning in response to the changed tactical situation. Their movement showed training and discipline that indicated professional capability rather than improvised response, suggesting that the threat to American forces extended beyond a single individual to encompass an organized effort that required comprehensive neutralization. The engagement that followed tested Sarah's ability to transition between targets under conditions that offered limited time for the careful preparation that had characterized her initial shot. requiring her to apply technical skills under tactical pressure that increased with each passing moment. The secondary targets were alert and mobile, using concealment and movement techniques that made precise engagement significantly more challenging than the patient stalking that had enabled her first success. Sarah's subsequent shots demonstrated capabilities that went beyond exceptional marksmanship into tactical thinking that adapted to changing conditions while maintaining the precision necessary for effective engagement at extreme distances. Each shot required individual calculation and adjustment, with environmental factors and target presentation creating unique challenges that tested different aspects of her training and natural ability. The operation concluded with the elimination of threats that had plagued American forces for months, achieved through marksmanship that established new standards for what could be accomplished by properly trained and equipped sniper personnel operating under optimal conditions. Sarah's performance had not only resolved the immediate tactical problem, but demonstrated capabilities that would influence how future operations integrated sniper support into complex missions. As Sarah prepared to extract from her position, she felt the satisfaction that came from mission accomplishment under conditions that had tested every aspect of her preparation and training. The shots she had made would be analyzed and studied by military professionals seeking to understand how individual capability could resolve tactical problems that conventional approaches had failed to address. The extraction itself required the same careful attention to fieldcraft that had enabled her successful approach, with enemy forces in the area potentially responding to the elimination of their sniper team through increased activity that could threaten anyone moving through terrain that offered limited concealment. Sarah moved through the mountain landscape with the stealth that had become second nature, using every available piece of cover while maintaining awareness of potential threats that could develop during her movement back to friendly positions. The debriefing that followed would document not just the technical aspects of Sarah's shots, but the intelligence preparation, tactical planning, and operational execution that had enabled success where previous efforts had failed. Her performance would be studied by sniper instructors and special operations planners, seeking to understand how individual excellence could be developed and applied to the most challenging operational requirements. But for Sarah, the immediate satisfaction came from knowing that her shots had saved lives and restored her unit's ability to operate effectively in defense of American interests and objectives. The skills her grandfather had taught her during hunting expeditions in Montana had evolved through military training into capabilities that could project American power across distances that turned geography itself into a tactical asset. The helicopter flight back to base carried a different energy than Sarah's arrival 3 days earlier, the aircraft now transporting someone whose actions had fundamentally changed how her unit understood the possibilities of sniper support in complex tactical environments. Sergeant Martinez sat across from her, his expression reflecting a combination of professional respect and personal gratitude that spoke to the bonds formed between soldiers who had shared life-threatening experiences and emerged successful through combined effort and individual excellence. The debrief at Forward Operating Base Chapman stretched through most of the afternoon, with intelligence officers, special operations planners, and senior commanders seeking to understand not just what Sarah had accomplished, but how her methods could be documented and potentially replicated by other personnel facing similar tactical challenges. The shots she had made would be analyzed through ballistic software and environmental modeling systems that could recreate the conditions and verify the technical difficulty of what she had achieved. Colonel Rodriguez, who had flown in specifically to conduct the operational assessment, brought with him the kind of institutional perspective that recognized exceptional performance as something that could influence doctrine and training approaches across the entire military system. His questions went beyond technical details to explore the decision-making processes and tactical reasoning that had enabled Sarah to identify solutions where previous efforts had failed. Private Chen, your performance over the past 72 hours represents the kind of capability development that our special operations community has been working toward for years, he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood how individual actions could influence broader strategic objectives. The shots you made weren't just technically impressive. They demonstrated tactical thinking that resolved a situation that was affecting operations across this entire theater. The documentation process that followed would create detailed records of Sarah's operation that would be studied at military academies and special operations training centers, with her techniques becoming part of the institutional knowledge that guided how future snipers were trained and deployed. But the immediate impact was measured in more tangible terms. American forces in the region could now operate without the constant threat that had constrained their movements and endangered their lives for months. The Rangers who had worked with Sarah during the operation provided their own assessments of her performance. Testimonies that went beyond professional evaluation to personal appreciation for someone who had risked her own life to protect theirs. Staff Sergeant Williams described her tactical planning as The most thorough preparation I've seen from anyone at any level, while other team members emphasized her ability to remain calm under pressure and execute complex tasks while under conditions that would have overwhelmed less capable personnel. But Sarah's success in Afghanistan represented more than just exceptional individual performance. It marked a turning point in how the military understood the potential contributions of personnel who had previously been excluded from the most demanding assignments based on assumptions rather than capabilities. Her achievements would influence policy discussions and training programs that were already beginning to recognize talent regardless of its source, opening opportunities for others who possessed abilities that the military needed but hadn't always known how to utilize effectively. The recommendation for Sarah's decoration came from multiple sources within the command structure, with officers at various levels recognizing that her actions deserved formal acknowledgement that reflected both their tactical significance and their broader implications for military operations. The Silver Star citation would eventually describe her performance in language that captured both the technical difficulty and strategic impact of what she had accomplished during those critical days in Afghanistan. Her transfer to an elite sniper unit happened with the kind of administrative efficiency that characterized decisions where bureaucratic processes aligned with operational requirements, moving Sarah from experimental training programs to established units whose missions required exactly the capabilities she had demonstrated. The transition represented validation that her skills had evolved beyond developmental potential into proven capability that could be relied upon for the most demanding assignments. The new unit Sarah joined operated according to standards that reflected years of refinement through combat experience and institutional learning, with training programs and operational procedures that had been developed through analysis of successful missions and honest assessment of failures. Her integration into this community of elite professionals happened through the kind of practical evaluation that combat veterans used to assess new personnel, not through credentials or recommendations, but through demonstrated performance under conditions that revealed character as much as capability. Master Sergeant Thompson, whose 20-year career included multiple combat deployments and whose reputation as an instructor was legendary throughout the special operations community, became Sarah's primary mentor in learning how exceptional individual skills could be integrated into team operations that multiplied effectiveness through coordination and mutual support. His approach to developing advanced capabilities emphasized the mental aspects of sniper operations as much as the technical skills, understanding that elite performance required psychological preparation that went beyond mechanical training. Chen, you've proven you can make shots that most people consider impossible, but working with special operations teams requires understanding how your capabilities fit into larger objectives, he explained during one of their early training sessions. Individual excellence is just the starting point. The real challenge is learning how to apply your skills in support of missions where success depends on perfect coordination between multiple specialists. The advanced training that followed pushed Sarah beyond the already demanding standards she had mastered, introducing complications and variables that tested her ability to maintain precision while operating as part of teams whose missions involved multiple moving parts and constantly changing tactical situations. She learned to coordinate her actions with close air support, artillery systems, and ground assault teams whose timing requirements meant that even perfectly placed shots could fail to achieve mission objectives if they weren't integrated into larger operational plans. But Sarah also discovered that her proven capabilities opened doors to missions that conventional snipers never experienced, assignments that required the kind of extreme range precision she had demonstrated in Afghanistan, combined with tactical flexibility that allowed for adaptation to unexpected developments. Her reputation had spread through networks of special operations professionals who understood that exceptional talent was rare and valuable, leading to requests for her participation in operations that pushed the boundaries of what sniper support could accomplish. The missions that followed Afghanistan took Sarah to environments and situations that tested different aspects of her abilities, from urban operations where precision shooting had to be conducted in populated areas with civilian safety considerations, to desert assignments where environmental extremes created challenges that went beyond anything covered in standard training programs. Each assignment added to her experience and reputation, building a record of success that established her as someone who could be relied upon when conventional approaches were insufficient. Her influence extended beyond individual mission success to training programs that sought to understand how her methods could be taught to other personnel, with Sarah finding herself increasingly involved in developing curricula and evaluation standards for advanced sniper training. Her insights into the mental preparation and tactical thinking that enabled extreme-range precision became part of the institutional knowledge that guided how the military identified and developed exceptional marksmanship talent. The soldiers she trained brought their own backgrounds and capabilities to the learning process, creating an environment where Sarah's individual excellence could be shared and multiplied through teaching that went beyond mechanical instruction to include the philosophical approaches that separated elite performers from merely skilled practitioners. Her grandfather's lessons about patience, precision, and understanding the balance between life and death became part of training that prepared other snipers for missions that required capabilities at the furthest limits of human potential. But perhaps the most significant impact of Sarah's career came through her influence on how the military understood capability development and talent utilization, with her success serving as evidence that exceptional performance could emerge from sources that institutional tradition hadn't always recognized or valued. Her achievements opened pathways for others who possessed abilities that the military needed, but had previously overlooked through policies that prioritized convention over capability. The recognition that came with her continued success included awards and commendations that acknowledged both individual achievement and broader contributions to military effectiveness, that Sarah understood that her most important legacy would be measured in lives saved and missions accomplished through capabilities that had once been considered impossible. Her shots in Afghanistan had proven that barriers could be overcome through preparation, determination, and the kind of excellence that transcended conventional limitations. Years later, when Sarah looked back on the journey that had taken her from a small town in Montana to the elite levels of military special operations, she understood that every challenge she had faced had prepared her for the moments when individual capability could change everything about tactical situations that seemed hopeless. Her grandfather's lessons had provided the foundation, military training had developed the technical skills, and combat experience had tested everything under conditions where failure meant more than just personal disappointment. The whispered conversations among rangers about shots that seemed impossible had evolved into documented case studies that were taught at military schools around the world, with Sarah's techniques becoming part of the standard curriculum for advanced sniper development. But for Sarah, the greatest satisfaction came from knowing that her example had opened doors for others who possessed talents that the military needed, creating opportunities for capable individuals who might otherwise never have had the chance to serve their country at the highest levels. The impossible shot that had saved a Ranger unit in Afghanistan had become the first chapter of a career that challenged assumptions about capability, gender, and the evolving nature of modern warfare. Sarah's story would inspire others to push beyond conventional limitations and demonstrate that excellence could emerge from unexpected sources when individual determination met institutional flexibility and the courage to recognize talent wherever it could be found. In the end, the Rangers had stopped whispering about impossible shots and started planning missions that incorporated capabilities they once thought existed only in theory, understanding that the right person with the right training could accomplish things that changed how entire organizations understood what was possible when human potential was properly developed and applied to the challenges that mattered most.